Hello, we're going to be talking today about writing a literary analysis. So what is a literary analysis? Well, it's literary, it's analysis, it's essentially an argument. It may also involve research on and analysis of secondary sources, which for our paper it will. A literary analysis should broaden your understanding and appreciation of a piece of literature. So here are some key terms and concepts, and these should be familiar to you from other lectures. So basics that you can examine when doing a literary analysis would be the plot, setting, narration or point of view, characterization, symbol, metaphor, genre, irony and ambiguity. And there are some other elements that you can examine. You can look at the historical context of a piece of literature. You can look at the social, political, and economic context, essentially what was going on at that time. You can look at the ideology. You can look at multiple voices and various critical orientations, as well as different literary theories. So some good starting points are to ask yourself these questions as you go back through and reread your text. Ask yourself, what themes is the author trying to convey? The author employs which techniques to convey the theme, mood, characterization, and other elements? What ideas lie beneath the text? So rather than just looking at it at face value, what is a deeper meaning for the text that you're reading? What significance or importance do you find in the work? So the literary analysis assumes knowledge of the work, and therefore you will not provide a summary of the piece. Each analysis paper supports a clearly defined thesis to be proved about the work. It's persuasive. So you're going to make a point about the work in some definitive way, and your thesis is going to let us know what that is. And you're going to use persuasive writing to get us to come around to your way of thinking. So first you'll want to stop and reread your choice. Take careful notes along the way and consider the literary elements while you read. If you're unclear of the literary elements, go back and rewatch the video from earlier in the term and use your textbook. So where can you find resources? You can check the library for various handbooks of literary terms. You can check for numerous introductions to literary criticism and theory, which are widely available, such as a handbook to literature. You can also use Google Scholar to figure out literary theory and things like that. What makes this literary? Well, usually a literary analysis will involve a discussion of a text as writing, thus the term literary, which means having to do with letters. So this will involve the use of certain concepts that are very specifically associated with literature, like metaphor and setting. So when you get down to how do you do the analysis piece, an analysis of a literary work may discuss how the various components of an individual work relate to one another. It could look at how two separate literary works deal with similar concepts or forms. It could also examine how concepts and forms in literary works relate to larger aesthetic, political, social, economic, or religious contexts. So when you're writing a literary analysis, you can go beyond the basic literary elements and apply them to other issues and categories. For example, psychology, politics, history, etc. A literary analysis should focus on one or a combination of elements to convey your investigation of the author's purpose. One being one of the major elements, one of the major literary theories, not just theme. So here you have the author's purpose, And you would want to take a look at things in relation to one another, like theme, conflict, and characterization. So let's look at some of the literary elements, such as character. Consider what consistent qualities the character has. What motivates the character? What complexities the character shows? And whether or not the character changes or remains the same throughout the story. Are the characters dynamic, static, round, or flat? Flat characters are one-sided or less developed characters. These characters are usually minor or represent something stereotypical, so they exist simply to make a point. And they're not developed much beyond that. Once they make the point, they're pretty much out of the story. Round characters are multidimensional and are usually the protagonist. These are more developed characters and seem more real. Dynamic characters are characters who go through a significant change in the story. The protagonist is usually a dynamic character. Static characters are characters who do not change throughout the story. When we discuss character types, we look for qualities that are physical, what they look like, implied or inferred, so these would be characteristics about their personality that we draw from our reading of the text. So think about the story Cinderella. How would you describe these characters? The prince, he's pretty flat and static. He's there, he's a prince, but we don't know much beyond that. But then we have Cinderella. She's round and dynamic. She's developed out and she undergoes a significant change throughout the course of the story. The evil stepmother. She's pretty flat and static too. She's there for the stereotype of evil stepmother, and she just simply remains the same throughout and doesn't evolve. So if you were talking about Cinderella, you might say, Cinderella is a beautiful young woman with blonde hair. She's sweet and kind, which you get that from the way she behaves in the story. She is the protagonist of the story and is a round, dynamic character. You can also look at diction, which is focusing on the actual words of the work. So ask yourself, is the language clear or does the author use metaphors and similes? Is this a language of emotion or reason? What images are created? How has dialogue been used? Does it add meaning to the novel? So think about the connotations. Analyze the figures of speech and sound effects of the work. The alliteration, the personification, the onomatopoeia, the diction, the metaphor, the simile, the descriptions, and the hyperbole. These elements all add to the meaning of the story. And don't forget, we talked earlier in the semester when you were writing narratives about conflict. So as you're taking notes, list all of the conflicts or tensions in the work and fill them out with examples or evidence from the work. Draw conclusions about the conflict and think about the universal ideas of conflict. If you remember, these are man versus man versus nature, man versus society, man versus self, man versus religion, man versus machine, and man versus supernatural. With theme, as you already know, theme is the central idea or message the author is sharing with the reader. It doesn't make a judgment, like drugs are bad. That's not a theme. It merely states something that is true about life and the human condition. Your theme is the opinion component of your thesis statement. Look for the meaning in the text, but don't settle for the first thing you see. Make a list of all possible themes stated in complete sentences and in universal terms. So think about, one theme of the pearl is that greed can be a destructive force. So look at integrity, power, love, revenge, good versus evil, injustice. But you have to build them out. How do you find it? Well, first you're going to have to read the entire novel. You're going to have to consider the literary elements. and think about what message are the literary elements combined trying to convey to the reader. What is the author trying to say to you about life? Never analyze theme alone. Instead, analyze how the author conveys theme through the use of other techniques. As you can see, theme is here, and branched off you have conflict, irony, figurative language, point of view, diction, symbolism. All of these feed into theme, and theme expands into all of these. So when you think about literary elements, the form and style, each genre or type of literature has its own principles of style and form. For example, if you pick up a horror novel, there are certain things you're going to expect to find there. And if you don't, it goes against the genre. So here, when you look at form and style, with poetry, as the book has talked about, it's examined through looking at rhyme, rhythm, sound devices, and format. Drama's elements are staging, props, actors' gestures, lighting, the set, and the visual effects. Fiction is examined by considering narrative point of view, setting, word choice, or characterization. So tone is the attitude of the speaker toward the novel. And then literary images. Most literature can be analyzed through images and symbols. Scan the work, listing images, symbols, searching for patterns and repetitions. So what images are constantly pushed through? Are you constantly seeing dogs? Are a certain type of flower constantly coming up? Write down page references and your first interpretations of what those symbols might mean. Remember to look at conflict. The author's purpose. Is it an internal conflict, external, human versus human versus nature, human versus society, human versus self? Characterization. Here you have a lot of overlap with how authors reveal characterization. So, as you can see through the different color diagrams, what are the characters thinking? What are they saying? What are other characters thinking? How are they behaving? And how does this fit into the theme or the author's purpose with emotional development, personality elements, characters, place, and setting? So, what makes a literary analysis an argument? When you're writing an argument for a literary analysis, you want to focus on specific attributes of the text. When you're discussing these attributes, you will want to make sure that you're making specific, arguable points, which should be in your thesis, about those attributes. You will defend those points with reasons and evidence drawn from the text. So taking a look at thesis statements. Which of the following is the best thesis statement? Moby Dick is about the problem of evil. Moby Dick is boring and pointless. Moby Dick is about a big white whale. Or, the use of whiteness in Moby Dick illustrates the uncertainty of the meaning of life that Ishmael expresses throughout the novel. Obviously the last one. To support the thesis, we want to include examples from the text. So, some direct quotations, some summaries of scenes, some paraphrases from the book. You'll want to, for your source material, maybe bring in another critic's opinion. You might want to discuss the text's historical and social context. Just always remember to read carefully and highlight useful passages and quotes. You'll want to definitely think back to plagiarism and MLA formatting in these times and maybe rewatch the MLA video to make sure that you do not inadvertently plagiarize material. So what are secondary sources? Secondary sources are books or articles that discuss the text you are discussing. They discuss a theory related to the argument you are making. Or they might discuss the social and historical context of the text you are discussing. So those are some ideas of what you can use for your source. Where can you find them? Maybe check EasyBib. You can look at academic databases through our library. You can look at the Dictionary of Literary Biography, maybe look at discipline-specific sources, other search engines, or a bibliography that's part of your text. So when you're integrating secondary sources, make sure you show how they relate to your thesis. Don't overuse any one secondary source, or for that matter, secondary sources in general. So you should only be using your text and one additional source for this paper. Remember that this is your paper and your argument. The secondary sources are just helping you out, so don't write around your sources. Let your sources work for you. Never, never, never plagiarize. I have a link for the OWL on plagiarism. You can click the link and take a look at that. It's the Purdue OWL. There's also plenty of material that we've gone over to avoid plagiarism. If it's not your original work, you must cite it. Make sure that you use resources to make sure you're crediting work that is not your own. So you want to organize your information. If you're going to discuss how a character is revealed through dialogue, setting, and symbolism, you would group information under dialogue, setting, and symbolism. If you're going to explore a story setting and how it portrays a climate of fear that turns into anarchy, you would group information under setting, fear, and anarchy. If you're going to explore how characterization, diction, and conflict reveal discrimination, you would group information under these headings. But we don't actually use headings. So as you're drafting, use the introduction to give a little background and clarity to what you'll be discussing. Have a very, very brief summary of the story in the first paragraph after your introduction. It should be no more than one paragraph. In each body paragraph, make sure you structure your paragraph so you have a topic sentence, use support to make your points, and then tie them together. Your conclusion should start with the broad points you're making about the piece and get narrower, then reiterate the thesis statement in a new way. So to recap, when writing a literary analysis, be familiar with the literary terms. Analyze specific items. Make an argument. Make appropriate use of secondary sources. Consult with me, your instructor, or use the Writing Center tutors for help when needed. Also, check out the Purdue Online Writing Lab. Thanks.